Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, I should say. Welcome to Module 7. If you are living in the United States, happy Thanksgiving in a couple of days. I hope that everybody has a little bit of time off. For all of our everybody that's in another country other than the United States, we're celebrating Thanksgiving this week, and this is a time that we can focus on family and friends, and usually involves a lot of eating, but we definitely want to focus on what we're thankful for during this holiday time. So today I have a couple things I want to do with you. The first thing I want to do is share what you're going to be doing in Module 7, which is our upcoming module. So I'm sharing the screen with you all, and I'm going to Content, and I'm going to Module 7. The first thing I want you to notice is just because we're in Module 7, we're not reading Chapter 7. We're actually skipping that chapter. We are going to be reading Chapter 8, which is entitled Comprehending and Composing Stories. You also have an article to read called Maximizing Small Group Reading Instruction. And this is a very current article about different ways to look at structured small groups other than just using leveled text. And this aligns with current research with the science of reading, so you need to read both of those. Then for your assignments, you have your discussion post, and here's your discussion post for this week. Chapter 8 is about comprehending and composing stories. So it's working on those literary standards. And I've written, students understand the concept of story through direct instruction with many lessons that should be explicitly taught. Those many lessons that explicit instruction could occur in focused units, literature circles, thematic units, or reading and writers workshop. Regardless of the patterns of practice, and that's your textbook talks about that, we know from research that students need explicit direct instruction. In your chapter, and it's not the whole chapter, but in part of the chapter, it talks about traditional guided reading groups. And that is one way that you can teach comprehension and composing of literary text. What I want you to consider for your discussion post, after you've read chapter 8 and the article, you need to do both, explain how you teach the concept of composition of story through small groups. So how do you teach comprehension and composition of story in small groups? Do you use more of a traditional way of guided reading, or what other method do you use? How do you know what books you're going to select for your groups? How do you determine what should be taught? Are there certain assessments that you use? And is this effective or not? So that's your discussion post. And then you also have one assignment where you're going to do your summary and reflection. Make sure that you do your summary and reflection for both the chapter 8 and the article. You need to have both. So there's only 2 assignments this week, not too bad. However, you have a big assignment in Module 8. So I would suggest that you begin looking at Module 8 and everything that's included in that module now, because it is a pretty hefty assignment. And just so you know, you can get to Module 8 after you take the course evaluation. So that's kind of IDT's way of saying, okay, do this course evaluation. So after you do the course evaluation, it'll let you go to Module 8. I just received an email today that those course evaluations are ready, and so you can do that at any time. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Module 8 because that's 2 weeks ahead, but just really briefly, in your major assignment that you're going to be working on is a differentiated instruction project. And so I can see here that I have a primary class option and an intermediate class option. So you are given different classes of students, and you're going to have probably about 24 different students. And it'll tell you if they're on grade level. It'll give you reading strengths and weaknesses for each child. And so what you're going to do is you're going to have quite a few things you need to do. The first thing you need to do is that you need to put those students in structured reading groups. It does not have to be by levels, because we've learned that, but you're going to have your students and you're going to put them in groups, and you're going to have to justify the reason for your grouping and what the focus of that group will be. So if you have 24 students, you may have 5 groups of 6 or 6 groups of 4, and you're going to put the kids in their groups, why you grouped them that way, and you're going to explain the focus of instruction. Then you're going to come up with centers that you're going to come up with 6 centers. You'll develop standards for those centers. You will develop the reason for the center. So that's the second big part, is those 6 centers that you'll develop. And then you have to decide where you're going to put those kids in centers. And so you have to put those kids in centers and explain why you put them in centers, and how those centers are going to address it. So you'll have the student's name, you'll have the reading group that they're in, their center choices, and why you put them in those centers. And then the last thing is a reflection that you're going to be writing. So I just show you this because it is quite a bit of information, and I just wanted you to have time to work on that before, I know some of you you really do your best on all of your work. So I just wanted to give you that opportunity to go ahead and look ahead at that. Okay, but for Module 7, 2 assignments: to read Chapter 8, read the article, you have your discussion post, and you have your summary and reflection of what you read. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I want to talk to you a little bit about what we are talking about today, which is the reading, composing, and composition for literary standards. So I wanted to first talk to you a little bit about just what our standards are. So currently, most states use the Common Core standards. For those of you that do not live in the United States, I wanted to give you a little bit of history, and maybe those of you that live in the United States might need a little bit of history about why we have the Common Core standards. And the reason I'm going over this is because a big part of the Common Core standards are literary standards. And so you kind of need to know why you have those literary standards. So why do we have the Common Core standards? Well, this is an article that I can share with you if you would like, and it talks about the Common Core standards. And so just a little bit of history. Those of you that remember President George Bush, he initiated a No Child Left Behind. And with No Child Left Behind, one aspect of that bill was that each state could come up. They had to have their standards, and they had to have a measure of assessment. Well, one would think, okay, that would be great. Everyone has their autonomy to do that. But what happened was, of course, every state wanted to be successful. They wanted their reading scores to be high. And so what happened is the level, there was no common level of proficiency. If you lived I'm from Indiana to Florida, everyone had different standards, and everyone had a different level to assess that the proficiency of those standards. So what that did is it kind of led to some watered down standards, which was a problem. And so what happened was, because of that, in 2008, No Child Task Force was determined, and this article talks about that task force. And in that task force, it was what we wanted to do was in the United States was come up with common standards for everybody. I know as a military wife that we've moved 18 times, it can be difficult if your child is moving from one state to another and if the standards are different. And so the reason the Common Core standards happened was we wanted a common standard no matter where people lived in the United States, or whether it was Massachusetts or Alabama, those standards would be the same. And so that was why it happened. And these standards, there were task force, educators were used to create the math and the reading standards. So that's important that you know. I wanted to share very quickly a little bit about what the standards are, because I wanted to show what the literary standards are. So in reading, and some of you are very familiar with this, some of you may not be familiar, our Common Core standards has what we call reading literary, which is really the focus of this chapter, composing and composition of story. So you have literary standards, you have informational standards. And when you compare those standards are the same, but one occurs in literary text and one occurs in informational text. For example, you might have in literary text, you're going to have the theme of a story. You don't have a theme of a story in informational text. You have the main idea and key ideas and details. You also have information. I already told you that informational. You have foundational skills. That's going to be your phonics, phonemic awareness, print concepts. You have writing standards, speaking and listening. We've talked about speaking and listening in this class, and language standards, which is going to include grammar. So those are the standards. But I wanted to show you, we're going to really concentrate on the literary standards, which is what our class, that's what this module is about. So here is the Common Core standards are what we call spiral standards. And so in a literary text, if you were in kindergarten, you would, the standard for RL stands for reading, literature, kindergarten, grade K, that means kindergarten. So with prompting and support, ask and answer questions about key details in a text. So kindergarten students are, let me make sure I'm in literary. Yes, I am. Okay. Key ideas in a text. When they get to first grade, they're going to ask and answer questions about key details in a text, ask and answer questions to demonstrate referring explicitly to the text. So I just wanted you to see how it goes up. So in kindergarten, it's with prompting and support. So in kindergarten, they're going to need support. They're going to need prompting. They should ask and answer questions about key details. But when you get to 12th grade, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, to make logical inferences from it, cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions. So you see how that one standard spiraled in complexity. Let's look at one more example. Okay, so this is a common standard for literary text with prompting and support. Retell familiar stories. Then in first grade, retell stories, including key details to demonstrate central message. In second grade, recount stories, including fables, folk tales. So you can see it's the same standard that's spiraling up in complexity. By the time they get to 12th grade, determine central idea or themes of a text and analyze their development, summarize the key supporting details and ideas. So this document has a lot of the the standards that as they spiral up. What I would like to encourage you guys to do is, if you do not use the Common Core standards, you need to look at your state standards and look at the ones for literary, because as we're saying in this module, we're looking at how to teach comprehension and composing of those literary texts. I also wanted to remind you that to look at the standards and look at how they spiral up and down. This is one way that you can differentiate. So if a student cannot maybe if you're working on a certain standard and they cannot do that standard at a second grade level, you might look at the standard at the first grade or kindergarten level and see if they can do it at that level. I think a lot of times we forget about differentiation in this way, but it's a very, very important way that we can differentiate, is by differentiating the complexity of the standard that you're teaching. So in Module 8, when you start working on groups and so forth, that's another way that you can look at the how you group kids. Okay, so this week, again, we're going to be looking at how to compose and how to teach comprehending and composing of stories, those literary texts. I hope that it will be helpful to you, and I will post some of the websites that I had, and just be familiar with your state. And those of you that are teaching in another country, I'd be interested. Tell us what your country uses. What are your standards that you use? That's all I have for now. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you have some time to take off and enjoy your family. Have a great Thanksgiving.